Streaming live via the internet, welcome to ISP Radio, your weekly source for ISP-related news, events, and interviews with industry experts. If you deliver internet via fiber optic, fixed wireless, coax, or any other way, you're in the right place. And now a brief word from our sponsors. Link Technologies Incorporated provides the lowest priced Microtech products in North America, as well as Wade Towers, Mimosa, Cambium, Ubiquity, Nettonics, and a host of other products and services to be your one-stop shop for your ISP needs. Visit www.linktechs.net. That's linktechs.net for more information. TowerCoverage.com, providing online RF coverage maps with website integration. Stop rolling your trucks for every site survey and start doing installations. Visit www.towercoverage.com now. And now we'd like to present our hosts, Steve Graybiel and Dennis Burgess.
Welcome to another edition of ISP Radio. I'm your host, Steve Graybiel, broadcasting my part of the show from my messy office in Moriarty, New Mexico, and Dennis is producing and co-hosting the show from St. Louis. Dennis, you there?
I am here.
Yeah, so the weather out here was beautiful yesterday and then gloomy today and rain for the next 2 days. It's kind of a bummer because I had a couple of solar relays that we had too much clouds over last week and it killed some of my batteries, so I hate having to spend money on batteries.
Yeah, they're kind of a necessity, though, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know, at any which rate, we definitely got a great show today for you. We have Preseem on today. I wanted to make sure I kind of pointed out that we actually have the CRS 317s in stock. And for those of you that don't know what those are, these are the 16X SFP Plus. So there's 16 SFP Plus ports on those. We have those in stock, and we are shipping them pretty quickly. We're shipping them today. If you need those retail for $3.99, and you can get those on linktechs.net if you need them. Other than that, well, we do have maps in stock. I don't know, there was some discussion on a list that people were saying, oh, I can't find maps. We got a whole bunch of them, so we got those as well. Otherwise, as far as the weather, it actually rained yesterday, and that ended our drought situation, which we did not have rain since September 4th last month. So almost 30 days of dry weather. Definitely was getting dry, and grass was dying, etc. At any which rate,
it's kind of odd for St. Louis, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's either feast or famine. You know how that works. Mm-hmm. But
yeah,
we normally get rain every once a week or once every other week, and that's no big deal. But we've definitely been dry lately. My grass has been dying. I've been watering it, and it's still dying, but that's okay. That means I don't have to cut it, right? Important things. But it is raining, and it's going to be raining I think all the way into the weekend. So I'm going to be flying out early Saturday morning, so we should be good there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, Westpalooza coming up. Very excited.
Yep, really good stuff, and we will have a after report show, not next week, but the week after that. Let me look at our radio calendar here. And, of course, you can visit ispradio.com and actually get all of our updates and all of our show schedules. But we're going to actually have Bridgewave on the 18th, and that day we're also going to recap Wispapalooza as well. So.
And remember to pack something pink.
Yeah. I don't have anything pink, but I'll find something.
Well, on the show today, we've got Adderlow Networks. We got the co-founder and the vice president of product management for Adderlow, Dan Siemon, and they have a product out there called Preseem, and it's a QoE product, which we just figured out was quality of experience. Dan, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
Dan, tell us a little bit about yourself and about Adderlow Networks, and then let's go into the Preseem product line. Seems interesting.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of share up the screen here. So So basically, Adderlow Networks, we're a networking company focused on building solutions for small internet providers. And I guess a bit of my history. So my involvement with smaller ISPs kind of goes back a long ways to when I actually owned a small dial-up ISP when that was still a thing. After that, I ended up working as a network admin, doing BGP and routing and switching and DSLAMs and all that good stuff, wireless for quite a while. After that, I ended up being a product manager at a telecommunications equipment vendor. So some of the things that I've been involved in are deployed today in some of the largest ISPs in the world. But I'm really happy that we're able now with Adderlow to focus back again on the smaller ISPs and do some really innovative things and not kind of work with the giants. So it's definitely my interest. I think the small ISP side of things. One of the things I do on the side is work with a local cooperative telecom that has a fiber and wireless infrastructure as well as on their board. So super excited to work with small ISPs again and kind of focus all my time there. So I guess from there, I can talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to spend most of the time not talking about our product, but talking about the general concept of QoE-based network monitoring. And then we'll have, of course, some screenshots and stuff just to kind of illustrate some points. But I'm not going to do too much of a deep dive on the product today. But at a high level, what Preseem is a network telemetry focused QoE platform. So what I mean by that, by network telemetry, is you can think of that as like really high rate, high granularity reporting. I'm not going to talk too much about telemetry as a concept today, but that's essentially kind of what it comes down to for the purposes of this discussion. I just have on the screen right now a quick little screenshot showing one of the views, and we'll go into a demo later and I'll show you what these metrics mean and how it fits together. But just to give you a sense of the kind of information that we'll be talking about after we kind of get through the overview side of things. And of course, you guys, the hosts, anyone else, feel free to kind of jump in with questions. It's much more fun to have a discussion than it is to just listen to me talk. So I can talk a little bit first about what quality of experience is, so QoE, and I'll just use QoE through the rest of the presentation. I include this slide because it's kind of entertaining in that you would expect as an organization as big and bureaucratic as the ITU to have a very politically correct and boring definition, and that's pretty much exactly what this is. So what I like to do is think about QoE as a comparison to traditional network monitoring. So traditional network monitoring would tell you if a host is up or down, white or black, whether it's responding to pings or it's not, for example. But the reality is your network actually is a grayscale, right? Like it could be up, but not delivering the service that your customers expect. Either latency's too high, loss is too high, throughput's too low. And what QoE is about, at least in my mind, is exposing that gradient from the up to down and good to bad and white to black, et cetera, throughout the overall experience, with really a big focus on doing this from the point of view of the customer. So reasons to do this, I think, are kind of self-explanatory, right? If you have a better quality experience network, if you're delivering the service that customers want, you're going to have lower churn, you're going to have lower support costs, you're going to be able to better target your infrastructure investment to part of the network that actually has QoE problems. And all in all, it's just a great addition to your toolkit to help run your business.
I want to just interject here. You bring up a great point. We as ISPs are judged two ways, as opposed to like the water company or the gas company, the power company. Power companies judged on, is the power on? That's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. But ISPs are judged two ways, and is it on or off, and are the speeds what I'm paying for? Just to point out that you bring up a great point with the slide.
Yeah, and even slightly above that, is the applications, as a customer, is the applications I want to use, are they working? It's right. It's not always just throughput. Sometimes it's latency, loss, could be other things. But yeah, there's an enormous variation in there between just simple good and bad, or up and down, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk. So no, great. Like I said, I think it's much more fun if we have a conversation. So in terms of, let's kind of just level set everybody on what I mean by traditional network monitoring, and then we'll kind of go on from there and some of the limitations of it. So by traditional network monitoring, I'm referring to things like ICMP pings every 1 or 5 minutes, SNMP queries every 1 or 5 minutes, smoke ping, bursts, that kind of thing. Typically, again, you're going to have intervals here of a few minutes in between pings. But if you think about this, what you're monitoring with these solutions is you're monitoring the nodes of the network. But your customers don't actually care about how many nodes are in your network, right? They care about the actual service delivery. So when you monitor individual nodes, you're monitoring what's kind of at best a proxy for what the customer actually cares about. And we'll talk about a couple examples how this happens. So one very simple example, right? If you have multiple network paths in your network, do you know if your NMS probes are actually following the same network path as the subscriber traffic? If they're not, you won't be able to detect errors, again, packet loss, latency, low throughput, all that kind of stuff that you'd be expecting your NMS to see. And there's even a worse version of this, which is a little more insidious. If you have multiple equal cost paths, or you have bonded Ethernet channels or something like that, your NMS traffic could be on one of the links, which is working fine, and half the subscriber traffic be on another link, which is dropping packets. And again, in that situation, your NMS may not be able to detect those problems and alert you to the fact that you have some unhappy customers until they call in, which is a much more expensive proposition. My personal favorite example of how this kind of thing can happen is if you think about having differentiated traffic classes in your network. So a very simple example here. We've got a red queue, a yellow queue, which has got subscriber traffic, a pink queue, which has the management traffic. And there can be really good reasons to do a separate queuing strategy for your management traffic. But the effect can be that you may not be able to see the congestion. So in this case, if all the subscribers' traffic is going through that yellow queue, your management traffic is going through the other queue, which isn't congested, your NMS may again report no latency, no loss, etc., but the customers are actually seeing problems. So this is actually, it's kind of surprising. This actually happens more than you might think. So there's default settings on some devices to, on particular DSCP bits to go to certain queues or Ethernet priority bits, or even some devices are devious enough to prioritize ICMP over other forms of traffic because they want to have a better ping result, for example. And this stuff can happen in your network even when you haven't explicitly configured it to happen. And we actually see real-world examples of this. So this really isn't an abstract thing. So I grabbed one quick little screenshot here. This is from a customer's network. And in this network, they had a device which was responsible for the plan shaping. So, a customer has 10 megabit plan, shaped them to 10 megabits. Their NMS didn't show much latency at all. I mean, everything looked fine. Once we put Preseem in the network, though, we were able to see that the TCP round trip latency was actually quite high. It was was that device, which was shaping only subscriber traffic, was introducing 40 milliseconds of latency to all the TCP. And because the NMS's traffic wasn't a subscriber, it wasn't subject to this shaping, and therefore didn't see the latency. So the cliff here that you'll see right in the middle, it happens to be at 8 o'clock in the morning when we did this, is when those shapers were turned off and all the traffic was treated roughly equally in the network. So this is really something that can happen, and it happens. Well, we've seen it in probably a third of the networks that we've been deployed in so far. So it's definitely something real that's it's probably a little surprising. So other problems. So granularity, again, if you're monitoring nodes in the network, it's really hard to say anything intelligent about individual subscribers or their access points. The frequency is often too low if you're monitoring every 1 minute or 5 minutes. So if you think about it, if you're monitoring every 5 minutes, you could hide a 4.5 minute outage. Well, your customer is definitely going to be unhappy if they have a 4.5 minute outage and you didn't even hear about it. And tens of seconds can cause buffering. Tens of seconds can cause buffering. A few seconds can ruin a game. These are the kind of intervals that your customers are judging your network on, and you need to be able to actually monitor on those as well. The last point, not having a complete view of the traffic, this could be a whole discussion in itself. And maybe at the end, if we have time, we can kind of talk about this in more detail. But If you're only monitoring the network nodes, you don't have a sense of what's actually happening on that last part of the network. And unfortunately, that last part in this context is the customer's Wi-Fi in their home. And customers can't tell if the service is bad, they feel it's bad because the Wi-Fi in the home is bad, or there's an AP problem, or anything else. And if you don't have a way to actually see, well, this individual subscriber has very poor QoE, but everybody else on the access point's fine, it's very hard to isolate if that's a customer problem or an AP problem or any of those other type of things. So again, I'm happy to dig into that a little bit later as well, but it's kind of a bigger topic. So we kind of view the solution to this is the general concept of monitoring the network based on the customer quality of experience. So without going specifically into what our product can do, basically what this comes down to is extracting the key metrics that describe the customer experience directly from the customer's traffic. So on the looking at individual sessions and taking latency measurements between packets, counting the TX and RX bytes at very fine granularity, looking for TCP retransmissions, all these kind of core metrics that define basically the impact of the network on all the different applications, and then breaking that down into an organizational structure that makes sense for WISPs. So in your case, it's basically, to an access point level, for example. If you can look at all the subscribers on an access point, you can get a sense if that problem is if a particular problem is an access point problem or something else. And we'll show examples of that later. And then finally, once you have this in place and you're actually measuring the QoE, then there's things you can do like advanced queue management algorithms to help actually improve the QoE for congested portions of the network. So that's kind of my whirlwind tour of the overall concept of QoE monitoring. And really, I guess one way to think about it is you're measuring what the customer cares about instead of the infrastructure side of things. And this doesn't mean that you don't need to measure the infrastructure side. A traditional NMS is still a required portion of everything, but this is a different way to view the network and in a more kind of customer-focused way. So a little bit into our product. So essentially what we do is we extract IP metrics for every IP address that our box sees. So this is, every individual subscriber, if there's management traffic, that's there too, but the focus is, of course, on the subscriber traffic. And then we aggregate that information to tell you about the overall QoE on the higher levels. So aggregating all the IPs on a sector to tell you about the QoE on that sector, and then from there from a tower, etc. And we do this for every IP address every 10 seconds. So it's really an enormous amount of data. I looked yesterday, and we're currently ingesting about 350 million metrics a day from our current customers. So it is adding up to be a decent amount of data. And just focusing on the core metrics, the things that we measure are latency, throughput. I mean, you could argue that's for the TX and RX of bytes and packets, and then retransmissions, which is a proxy for the loss on the network. And if you kind of think about any packet network, any kind of pathology in the network manifests as one of three things: either higher latency, a change in throughput, or a change in the retransmissions or drop, really. And drop ends up being the same thing from corruption, because the packets just dropped when the checksum fails. So if you can measure these three kind of core metrics of a network at a very high level or very high granularity and roll it up into an actionable grouping, again, like access point, you really have a great picture into the overall network without worrying about any additional complexities on top of that. One thing I'm actually really, really excited about is the way that we do latency measurements. We can get thousands of latency measurements per customer or per IP address per second, depending on how active that IP address is. So we really have just an enormous amount of data on an ongoing basis of what the performance of the network is. And again, we do this by extracting it out of the metrics, not by introducing new traffic into the network as active probes, for example. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of do a very brief walkthrough through a couple screens of what Preseem looks like, just to get you a sense of kind of some of the information that's there. And then from there, we'll hop back out to the slides, and we can talk a little bit about some specific examples that I've extracted in screenshots and stuff to go from there. So
we do have a question on our chat.
Yeah, sure.
And
sure.
It makes sense to ask this question, and it basically says, why does a WISP need this versus fiber DSL cable circuits? My argument would be, I think all providers would have to have or should have this, but That's the question.
So there's no specific reason. So the only part of our product that's WISP specific is things like this wireless summary that I'm showing on the screen now. So essentially, that's how we're rolling this up into a view that kind of matches, I think, and you guys, welcome to comment on this, on the way that you would manage your network in terms of what's the QoE on a tower, what's the QoE on an individual sector, for example. The underlying metrics and the analysis engine and data collection and all that stuff we're doing is perfectly viable in any access technology. We basically decided to focus on the WISPs at the beginning because we believe that you guys have a pretty variable network that can benefit the most from understanding this. And there's certainly DSL networks and other technologies out there that have variable networks too. And we'll eventually go into that market, but for the moment we're entirely focused on WISPs. So the big advantage of that, I think, is it allows us to do things like focus on integration with WISP billing vendors versus other areas as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that later too.
So so
you guys tackled the hardest sector of internet delivery because of the like you said, the variability of how we deliver it.
Right, and it changes over time too. We've had some customers say, well, could I just put this on one particular part of the network? I'll identify the problems and then I'll move it to another part. Well, that's okay until there's a windstorm and there's an antenna unaligned and you can't see it anymore, right? So there's just a lot of variation and ongoing changes in WISP networks. So we felt that was a really great spot to start. And again, we will probably end up doing a version of some of these roll-ups targeting other access technologies, but that's not our focus right now.
Gotcha. So how is this different than deep packet capture like NetFlow?
Yeah, so we don't. So all the metrics are actually calculated on the box. So I have a deployment diagram we'll get to later. But we basically extract them as the traffic goes by, do the latency calculations, all that stuff, do local 10-second summaries, and then pump it up to our cloud and our analysis engines where we can roll it up and slice and dice it into different dimensions. So we don't in any way store all the packets. So there's basically like the impact to your network is one device that's capturing the inspecting the traffic, not capturing, just for the purposes of that question, and just pumping metrics to the cloud. So it's very simple to operate. You don't have to have a big storage array or anything like that. It's just, it basically drop it in, it sees traffic, and stuff starts populating on the dashboards.
Yeah, and I think this is different than deep packet capture like NetFlow, because NetFlow, it captures the data and then it simply gives you a burst of data up to your NetFlow collector. So you would never really get to see the actual TCP metrics of a particular customer in basically real time. And I'm not saying this is real time, but you're not capturing it in a sense in a real time capture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, if you were willing to build the analysis of tracing the packets that we've built, you could do it based on packet captures, but it would mean you'd have to have all of the packet captures for your whole network over time to extract those metrics out of. So we just do that in real time and fire the summaries up, basically.
Yep, there you go.
Okay. So I'm going to, again, just in the interest of very quickly showing the top level of what this looks like. So this is our wireless summary view. And basically this is taking metrics, those raw core metrics that I talked before, and rolling them up to give you a picture of an individual sector's performance during the busiest hour. So to kind of geek out on the stats and stuff a little bit, basically what we do is we take a 1 hour sliding window, sliding every 15 minutes. So that gives you 96 samples a day. We find the busiest hour of the day. So that basically represents the worst case. Actually, if you hover over these, you can actually see the descriptions of what I'm saying. But that gives you the worst case picture for each one of these individual metrics. So this particular example here, actually, let me sort a couple of these. So this Woodward Tower example, the worst case latency in the worst hour, the 50th percentile latency was 200 milliseconds. So that sector's probably has something that needs to be looked into. The busiest hour had 15 active subs. So that's subs that actually generated traffic on the network. It's not associated SMs or anything like that. This sector delivered 20 megabits of throughput during the busiest time of the day. And if I scroll over a little bit more, downstream was 2.3. Kind of low, and then again a little bit farther. We could see that this sector delivered the typical subscriber. So this is per sub downstream. We basically look at all the subscribers that were active during the busiest hour and say, what did the typical, kind of defined by the 50th percentile here, what did the typical subscriber get for throughput? And that allows you to look at your sectors and say, okay, well, what are my sectors doing? So here I have a sector that's delivering 5 megabits per customer. And if I go all the way to the bottom, I have other sectors that during peak only deliver 1 megabit per customer. Maybe those are the areas that I need to invest in my network or upgrade and things like that. Sorry, was there a question there?
No.
Okay, sorry. And then on the side here, you just have a very quick overview. So we only track the wireless topology, so that's kind of why that looks like a star here. But you can, at a quick glance, kind of see individual sectors, whether their latency numbers are showing as just green, yellow, red, gives you just kind of a high-level overview of what's happening, and you can rearrange these things and do other fun things. So that's the wireless summary view. And this is really where our focus is now, is how do we extract out of all this data we're getting the right metrics to direct you to where you need to make improvements or can make improvements in the network. The other screen is Explore. Actually, sorry, just let me jump back there. Kind of went to the wrong screen there.
So is this, while this is loading, is this designed to really look at our access point infrastructure, you know, the backhauls and the such to our access system, or is it down to the customer subscriber module?
Actually, so it's down to individual IPs. So we track all these metrics for every IP. Internally, we tag the IP and say this IP is user Bob. So in the example I'm going to show you in a minute, they use subscriber identifiers in this network, or sorry, just numbers, but it could be Bob at ispradio.com, for example. And then we can roll that up. So we know Bob is on APA, and we know APA is on tower A, and then from that you can get a picture of each individual level. And then some of the examples we'll get to in a minute, you can see how that kind of guides you to debug the network, where, for example, if all the APs on a particular tower have really high latency, it's probably the backhaul to that tower that's a problem, not the individual APs, as one super simple case. So if I take this Woodward tower, I'll just jump over to the view for that individual tower. Again, won't spend too much time on this, other than just, this is essentially the Explorer view where you can deep dive into the metrics. So if you don't want to just see our summaries, you want to actually see what was the exact latency at a particular time, not just the busiest time, or the latency per IP address or per subscriber. All that information is kind of available in this Explorer view here. The one thing I do think is kind of cool is the histogram at the top here. What this is telling you is the latency, the typical latency for individual subscribers. So on this sector, there is 4 subscribers that get 40 milliseconds as their median latency, and there's 3 that have a median latency of 110 milliseconds. So kind of gives you a sense of what's happening with the individual subscribers throughout. And as I mentioned earlier, the numbers here are subscriber identifiers. So in different networks, that could be Bob at bob.com and other things like that. In this case, it just happens to be numbers. The final thing, which I really won't spend hardly any time on, is we do have a support view as well, which is designed to give this information to L1 support techs in a way that makes sense. So you can just quickly see, well, what in the last 2 weeks, what's the peak download rate achieved by the customer? Not what is their plan, what did they actually achieve? And you can compare their usage and other things like that. So I don't think I picked a particularly great example here, but it does give that L1 to support view, so they can quickly get on the phone with somebody and say, okay, well, I see this is happening, and this is a possible solution, or identify whether it's their problem or the WISP's problem, for example. So that's kind of the whirlwind overview of what it looks like. So just to quickly talk about some of the things that we've actually seen, just to give you a sense of what this actually looks like. When we look at the raw data. There we go. So I have, I think, 5 or 6 different examples here, just to give a sense of it. So this particular example, the top level chart is these are extractions from our Explorer view, of course, that I mentioned earlier. So these are completely over time, not trying to take out the peak time. So here we have the downstream bit rate at the top and TCP retransmission percentage at the bottom. So you can see in this particular backhaul that the throughput stayed relatively the same through the peak hour, so 6 p.m. on to midnight. However, the TCP retransmits went way up. So this is indicative of a backhaul that drops packets under congestion, doesn't have very deep queues, but again, very strong indication that this backhaul is well overloaded and needs to be upgraded. This is a similar situation showing with a backhaul congestion that actually does have better buffering or more buffering, depending on whether you believe that's better or not. In this case, the individual lines are towers behind a particular backhaul. That's just the T4, T1, T2, etc. And you can see as the throughput goes up, this area under the curve here is entirely black, which basically means all the towers underneath this backhaul, their latency is all going up at the same time, which again is a very strong indicator that this backhaul is the problem, not the individual towers. Same thing happens on the sector side of things. This is I forget exactly what type of model sector this is, but when you go down to the sector view, you have individual IP addresses. You can see the numbers there, .218.45. That's just with the first part of the IP address cut off. And you can see that when the throughput goes up on this particular sector, the latency for all the subscribers went really high. Again, this time here from like 4 p.m. on to 8 p.m. And that's an indication that that sector is overloaded. It's not, individual subscribers. If there was still some subscribers that had good latency, then you would know that that one subscriber is self-congesting or they've got something bad going on in their home. But in this case, it's pretty obvious that that sector's got some issues. Interference is also a really interesting thing to see. Every network we've went into, one of the first things that the WISPs end up doing is they see erratic patterns like this, where the latency spikes up, but the throughput didn't change. So that's kind of the example here around midnight. Really high latency, not high throughput. Going over to the next day, it's really spiky, doesn't always match the throughput. When you see those two things not correlated, like load not correlated to latency, it's a very strong signal there's something else going on. Typically it's interference, bad radio, bad antenna, bad cable, something like that. So like I said, every network we went in, these things stick out like a sore thumb, and typically it's just like a channel change or something like that people do, and it flattens out right away. Last two examples, a little bit more specific. These behaviors may not be specific to the two vendors, but I call out the model number or the make just for clarity. In this case, you could see if you look at the download chart at the bottom here, we've got this green area, and that's subscriber .13, right? You can see when he becomes active, the entire sector's latency goes through the roof. And what this turned out to be was one individual customer on that access point that had poor signal. And because of that poor signal, when he was active, he drove everybody else's latency up, basically took more airtime. So this is a pretty strong example of one customer having a very negative effect over all the other customers. In this sector, there's there's about 7 different customers on this individual sector. There could be many more, but it would say others here if there was. So one customer driving up the latency, and in this case, I believe they ended up switching that subscriber to a different tower or something like that, and again, flattened everything out. And final example, this is an example of plan enforcement being done directly on the AP. In this case, just happened to be a Cambium 450. And what this indicates, you can see over the course of the day that the throughput goes up, but the retransmission percentage stays relatively flat all the way along, so it's not correlated with load. And this is just indicative of plan enforcement done with essentially a policer, something that drops packets instead of buffering them over time. So when a packet network is full, it has a choice, right? It either drops a packet on the floor or it holds it and adds latency. In this case, it's choosing to drop it, and you get a behavior like this. So this could be a situation where the customer may want to think about doing the plan enforcement in another device rather than directly on the AP, for example. So deployment model. Talked about a bunch of these components already, but super simple diagram here. Essentially, we have our cloud area where we do all the data visualization, all the storage and analysis, and that's really where a ton of the work from our side goes into things. That directly integrates with billing systems. So we have an announced integration with Sonar that we have deployed at several customers. We have a few more that we've done by ourselves, and we're going to announce at least one more at WISPapalooza with another major billing vendor. And again, this is kind of the benefit of being focused on WISPs, is we can focus on other products in the WISP ecosystem without being worried about, what do the DSL vendors do for, or DSL networks do for their particular billing systems and stuff. So that's the cloud. That's really where all the analysis, the machine learning stuff we're playing with, and all the other things happen. And then the Preseem node is an inline appliance, so you can buy an appliance from us, or you can run the software directly on your own hardware. Just a commodity server with a couple of good NICs and Linux runs that perfectly fine. We even have some customers that run it in a virtual machine. Can do up to 10 gigabits a second depending on the throughput, or sorry, depending on the specific hardware that's chosen. And the last little piece is the Preseem SNMP agent. So what it's responsible for is getting us that topology information. So to have this view that I show at the top here of individual sectors and how are they behaving, we have to be able to know which IPs are on which sectors, and the SNMP agent reaches out and figures all that out. And it that we go monitor, so you don't have to enter them twice into Preseem. So that's kind of my whirlwind tour of QoE network monitoring and a little bit of what Preseem is. Didn't want to spend too much time doing pure product stuff. So hopefully that was interesting. I guess the summary is really, QoE-based network monitoring. It allows you to monitor that customer experience instead of just monitoring the network, which is really just a proxy for what the customer cares about. And for anybody that's going to be at WISPAPalooza, there's going to be a few of us there. Please stop by. I'd be happy to grab a beer or coffee with anybody. And hopefully we have some questions. I'll be happy to dig into anything.
Yeah, we do have one good question. And again, this kind of goes back to this packet capture and deep packet inspection. This is a packet capture or sniffer from the chart. So basically we get the packet capture that comes in. We get the data from that. How is this different than packet inspection? And from my eyes, it is basically packet inspection, but then you're adding your additional cloud layer that actually can give a report on it.
Right. Yes. So it is. So we're in line. We're inspecting the packets. I didn't talk at all about much about the enforcement aspect of things and the queuing algorithms, but from a statistics standpoint, yes, it's inspection. We just look at basically the transport layer and down. We're not DPI. We're not trying to do DPI. But we can extract those key metrics, which really define the behavior of every application, as I mentioned, the latency, throughput, and those things, and take that up and with the huge amount of samples, every 10 seconds, every IP address, break that down into those groupings that make sense for your business versus just, if you just look at 1,000 IPs and see their latency over the course of the day, that's pretty useless, right? Because you can't map that back to an individual access point that's having a problem, for example. So it's all that analysis on top of that I think is really where the differentiator comes from. And beyond that, as we add more, as we're learning more from different WISPs, we have a ton of data. So one of the things we're going to announce at WISPAPalooza is a live dashboard that compares access points from different vendors. So taking the customers in, looking at the latency across all the Cambiums, all the Ubiquities, all the red lines, all the ones we see, and giving a summary of how those different units compare is the kind of stuff that we can do when we have all this in a cloud analysis layer, I guess, for lack of a better term.
There you go. Steve, you got any other questions? I do not have anything else.
This is an inline box that goes in our network that we can buy, and you guys load the software and stuff on it. If someone's interested in this, what's the cost of something like this? Is it on a per subscriber base? Is it a flat rate monthly fee? Because it is cloud based, and all that data is going up to your cloud for us to look at our dashboard, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so there's two parts to that. So the first part is the hardware side. So use your own server, or use a VM, or buy our appliance. We have a couple of appliances. One's less than $1,000. The other one's about $2,000. So they're not particularly expensive servers, even if you want to go buy a server yourself. So that part's pretty simple. The commercial model is a per subscriber monthly price. So that's target price is around 50 cents a sub. That gives you all the different modules, and we'll probably break that down into different modules later. So maybe just have the support be separate from the overall operate, which is kind of more of an operational focus. But that gives you kind of a ballpark of where we're at. And we have a 30-day trial. Like if you have a server and you want to try it, spin up a Linux server. We'll log in. We'll install the software, and you can see everything for 30 days. It's no problem.
So you mentioned two. To me, it seems like two I want to say versions. What go a little bit more in depth on the two versions that we could get, the operational and the
Yeah,
other
so
one.
right now it's all bundled. What I was just implying there is right now we just bundle it all together. So essentially having that L1 support view, which we're just rolling out, and the deep dive into the operational side of things, like the tower and sector and all that. At some point in the future, we may split those into separate pricing. Right now, it's just all bundled together as one.
So 50 cents a sub.
Yeah, and then there's other Sorry, go ahead.
Pretty reasonable, it sounds like to me, for the kind of granularity you're getting. Like you said earlier in the show, someone could be under a 4-minute outage and we wouldn't even see it.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we think it's reasonable, but yeah, it definitely it's different in that we have significant costs on the cloud side versus just like a box that you just. If you buy a router or a switch, you kind of put it in the network and the vendor doesn't have any ongoing costs. Unfortunately, our world doesn't work like that when we're pumping, those kind of metrics up. So a SaaS model does fit well from that standpoint. And yeah, so the other things that we want to do, and this is looking much farther out, is, well, at least, next year out anyway, is things like a marketing view. So you could identify subscribers that are consistently achieving their maximum bit rate, and those might be upsell opportunities, for example. So that's some other things that we want to do with the data that we just haven't gotten to yet.
Right. How long's this product been out, and how long has Adderlow been around?
So Adderlow's been around about 4 years. It's amazing how time flies. So our first product was focused around Netflix caching. Essentially, we were working more on the satellite side of things with that. But Preseem has been, we launched that in February, I believe. So it's been 8 or 10 months. Yep.
And have you had a pretty decent take rate? I mean, you probably had a lot of beta testers, right?
Yeah, we're pretty happy. I think Wispapalooza is going to be a really interesting kind of launching point. So we've been out, talking to as many WISPs as we can and being active on the Facebook groups and stuff. But Wispapalooza is really the first big event that we've talked about Preseem at all. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the feedback. I'm going to be on the QoE panel if anyone's interested and wants to come to the QoE panel, or of course, stop by the booth. I'm super happy to talk about this and things that we can even do better. I mean, if there's different ways that you'd like to see the data sliced, it's an amazing thing. Once you have the data, that kind of stuff becomes really powerful.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, for coming out in February, this is there's other ways of doing it, but to me it seems like it's a pretty easy to understand and maybe easy to set up system to help us be more granular. Mm-hmm. Dennis, you got any questions?
I am going to check, and I do not have any other questions at this point in time.
Well, can you show us your screen again about how we can get in contact with you if the listeners
sure.
are interested, and then definitely we'll come by the booth and talk with you about this. And so you're doing a topics presentation on QoE at Wispapalooza?
Yeah, that's right. So there's I forget which day it is. Maybe it's the Wednesday. There's on one of the technical tracks. There's a QoE session, so I'll be involved in that.
Excellent.
Yep.
There we go.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for your time. Anyone have any questions? Please feel free to reach out.
You bet, and we'll definitely see you at Wispapalooza.
Great. I look forward to it.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for listening on the show today and talking to Dan Siemon with Adderlow Networks. Really interesting product that is just, it sounds like this is at the cutting edge of where they're going, and really glad to have them on our show. Dennis, you want to wrap us up?
Yep, I will wrap us up. Take it easy, guys. Remember, there is no show next week, but we do have a show the following week that is, I believe, it's Bridgewave, right?
Bridgewave and the follow-up to Wispapalooza.
Yeah. So we have that following Wispapalooza. So definitely be joining us if you did not make it to Wispapalooza. However, you should make it to Wispapalooza. With that said, we will wrap up.
Thank you for listening to ISP Radio. We hope you've gained new insights and additional wisdom in our industry as well as your business. Please remember to visit our show sponsors via the links on ispradio.com. If you're interested in becoming a show sponsor, contact us at sales@ispradio.com. Now go out there and push those packets as fast as you can. Good luck and Godspeed.